Good morning and welcome. I am Susan Murray, the Director of the David Hume Institute, and I am delighted to welcome you here to this briefing on the latest Understanding Scotland economy tracker. The data was only collected 2.5 weeks ago at the start of February. This is a quarterly survey that we undertake with the Diffley Partnership to ensure that everyday lives of people behind the economic headlines stay in front of everyone's minds. The results we will hear today were collected. Oh, I've already told you that. God, I'm repeating myself. Sorry about that. Rusty, this is my first one of the year, so please excuse the repetition. So the microphone's working for the recording, so if you're struggling to hear, just move further forward. Can you hear okay, or do you want me to talk a bit louder? Can everyone at the back hear? Louder. Okay, louder, right. Okay, so that's worth knowing for the panel as well then, if everyone needs a bit louder. But if you are struggling, please do move further forward because there are some seats at the front. It's my job to introduce you and look after you. So the first thing is we're not expecting any fire alarms. So if we do hear one, we will proceed to the nearest exit, which is behind you. We're recording the event. I was just about to say that, which is why the speakers have microphones. They are not for amplification in the room. So if anyone is hard of hearing, please move to the front. Now, next, I'd like to introduce Scott. Many of you who are regulars will know him. Scott is the Senior Research Manager at the Diffley Partnership. He will present the latest Understanding Scotland Economy Tracker findings. They track economic confidence and buying intentions over time, as well as helping us to understand and monitor economic attitudes and public opinion. Scott will be followed with reflections from Charandeep Singh and Margaret Douglas. Charandeep is the new Chief Executive of Scottish Chambers of Commerce, and we're delighted to welcome you for your first time here. Scott is Scotland's largest business network, where he represents Scotland's business community nationally and internationally. He's also Vice Chair and Board Member of the City of Glasgow College, Council Member for the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, and a Committee Member at the Law Society of Scotland, and a Judge for the King's Awards for Enterprise. And Charandeep will be followed by Margaret Douglas, who is a consultant in public health with Public Health Scotland, where she is the lead for economy, health and mortality trends. She's also the clinical lead for the Scottish Public Health Observatory and Health Impact Assessment. Sorry, lots of long words here. She was previously a consultant in public health for NHS Lothian, where her remit focused on health inequalities and health improvement. Her interests include health inequalities, social determinants of health, and links between the economy, place, and health. So after we've heard from all of them, we'll open it up to the room. Now, I know there's lots of expertise in the room here, so we're really keen on your reflections on the data that you'll hear from Scott, and also questions for the panel so that we can tease out some of the things that might not have come out in the presentation initially. So please do get ready to share. And I'll also add that we are finishing really sharp today because we know a number of you are travelling to another event that takes place immediately after this. So if you have got a question, do get in quick because we will be rattling through them very quickly afterwards. Without further ado, over to Scott.
Morning, everybody. So, as Susan was saying, this is the first one of the year. It's also the last Understanding Scotland economy tracker before the election. So it's their kind of last chance that we're on this study anyway to look at the issues that people in Scotland say matter to them, and also a bit about kind of economic trends. So the headlines from this time around, well, I'll go through the methodology first. I know it's everyone's favourite slide, so I'll make sure to go through that. The fieldwork was conducted between the 1st and 4th of February, so if we want to place that after Christmas, but before Anna Sarwar called for Keir Starmer to resign, and it received 2,131 responses from the population in Scotland, 16 plus, and the data is weighted to be representative of the Scottish population, and there's a link to the report in full there. The question that we open the survey with for people is effectively a very, very open one, and it is left really to the interpretation of people themselves. We ask people whether they think things in Scotland are heading in the right or the wrong direction. And what you can see here is a majority of people in Scotland tell us that they think things are headed in the wrong direction. So over half, 53% this time around. Now that's actually better than what we've seen before. If you could sort of believe it, it's dropped by 6 percentage points in this wave. And then we see an uptick in the people saying that they believe things in Scotland are headed in the right direction of about +3 in this wave. And then there's a big cohort who say they simply don't know. And what's interesting here is this is the sort of second time we've seen this in an election year. So if you look back to February 2024, we've seen a bump around February. People, maybe looking forward to the fact that there was going to be an election on the horizon that year. Similar this year, but we'll see from some of the other indicators as well that there's been a bit of improvement in economic sentiment, albeit we're hardly in a position where we're shouting from the rooftops that people are feeling really optimistic about what's happening. People are slightly less pessimistic than before, if we want to take that maybe as a little bit of a win, if we want to take one from any of this data. There are some differences by demographics. The key one in here is age. People those aged 16 to 34 are more or less likely to think things in Scotland are going in the wrong direction at 40%. Those aged 65 plus, more than 6 in 10 would say they think things in Scotland are going in the wrong direction. And then we kind of, for 18 waves now, can you believe, we've been tracking the issues that matter to people in Scotland. And this question asks people, what are the top three, from a big long list, what are the top three issues facing Scotland today? And really, it's been a story of kind of similarity over the course of the study. Healthcare and the NHS and cost of living and inflation have, for a long time, been the top two issues, that we see people identify when we do this. So around half say the healthcare and NHS is amongst the top three issues, and just over 2 in 5 say cost of living and inflation, and that's bumped by 5 percentage points this time. The story of this wave has actually been really a story of stability, sort of beyond that. We've seen a kind of entrenching of these issues. So in previous presentations here and in previous reports, we've made a real virtue of the increase in immigration as an issue because it was down at below 10%, late as November 2023, and it's up at 23% now, but that's stuck stable this time. There hasn't been an increase in the proportion who name that as a top issue, and that's the first time for many, many waves where that's been the case. So it's fair to say it's probably a fairly entrenched sort of third issue for now. And then there's this sort of second tier of issues, if you'd want to call it that we see that again have stayed stable. So poverty and inequality, the economy at large, trust in politics and housing are sort of the kind of ones after that. And we cut this off at 10%. So there's more issues on there, but this is charts cut off those that more than 10%. I think that kind of in my reflections, it's interesting that trust in politics has stayed there so high for so long, actually. And I think it does sort of maybe speak to some of what we see in the right, wrong direction questions and what we see in wider polling around public attitudes, people's disaffection with politics, etc., as we kind of head towards the election. And as I say, we cut that off at 10%, so there's obviously loads of other issues that we ask about, but what we can see here on the selected issues is that kind of below that sort of top tier, we've got social care and mental health and well-being, around 1 in 10 would name that one of the top three issues. The environment and climate change down at 1 in 10 still, and that, that previously would have appeared on that chart maybe about 2 years ago, now it doesn't. And constitution devolution pretty low down on people's priorities, and this sort of mirrors what we see in wider polling about ahead of the election too. And it's fairly consistent across demographics, these, right? So, the healthcare and the NHS and cost of living and inflation, we've kind of just taken a couple of selected demographics here in order to demonstrate that, but you can see those are the top issues amongst, both the youngest people in the survey and the oldest people in the survey, and also, men and women, and also immigration features quite highly for all the cohorts as well. There's not a massive degree of kind of difference between the demographics when we look at the proportion that kind of attribute how important these things are to them. The things that are maybe a wee bit different is like housing appears higher amongst those ages 16 to 34, even if we can't see it here. On there, for example, that would be something that we would see a little bit higher. And we also started asking about local priorities as well as national priorities, just to see if there was much of a difference. And the headline would be, there's not much of a difference, but there is some difference. So what we can see here is that healthcare and the NHS and cost of living and inflation and immigration remain the top three issues if we think about local issues for people. But housing kind of bumps up that list a bit in order to, as we can see here, and things like trust in politics kind of come down. And sorry, I can see someone's trying to take a photo of that, I'll go back. So if we can see that, then you can see here that that's, it fairly mirrors the national. But in this chart here, we take some of those just to make it a wee bit easier to see, so we don't have to remember all the figures we've just seen over the last two graphs. And what you can see here is, yes, healthcare and the NHS remains high at a local and a national level, Immigration, as well, but slightly, less at a local level. And what I was saying about like housing and transport, you can see maybe issues that are a wee bit more localized to people are higher up on people's priorities of local issues. So it all kind of shakes out to sort of make sense. And we broke that down by the regions as well. So these are the Scottish Parliament regions. If we look across these, again, healthcare and the NHS, cost of living and inflation are the top two issues across local issues across all of the regions. Um, Slight flips in order, but nevertheless, it's always the top two issues in every region when people are thinking about local issues. Immigration a bit higher in some regions than others, and then we can see pockets of issues that are a wee bit higher in different areas. So if we take housing is seen as more of a local issue in the Highland and Islands and the Lothians than it is elsewhere. Social care higher up on Highland and Islands, and we can think about why that might be when we think about the demographics and the challenges that might be in those regions compared to some of the more urban regions. And you see in Glasgow, for example, in the west, that actually things like poverty and inequality are a bit higher. And in West Scotland, mental health well-being's actually features in the top 5 issues in that area, as opposed to it doesn't really feature anywhere else like that. And that kind of jumped out at me this time and gave me pause to think why that might be. Not that I have an answer, which so why did I bother dwelling on it? But if we look here at the sort of kind of top economic issues, we then kind of move on to start talking about the economy now. So that's the kind of context of wider issues. If we look at the economic issues, again, cost of living and inflation is the biggest economic priority of people in Scotland, and it has been over this series consistently, but far and away higher than all of the other issues that we have there. And what we can see is that this has been very stable as well. So there's not a lot of change in here. However, some things have sort of maybe responded to some of what we've seen in the news. So we see a 3-point increase in, concern about unemployment, for example. That kind of corresponds with what we've seen in the news lately. Managing public finance, a 5 percentage point drop in that in tax and spending, which is interesting, maybe showing people aren't prioritising that as highly now some of the other things. And health of the workforce, seeing a 2 percentage point increase this time, so about 1 in 10 thinking about that, and we'll flow into that quite neatly now. And we've been measuring this for quite some time as well, which is basically people's economic outlook. So we're asking people, if you think about both general economic conditions and your own personal financial circumstances, think back a year, how are they now? Think forward a year, how do you think they're going to be? So if you look at this now, what we see here is that around 6 and 10 tell us that they think that general economic conditions are worse now than they were 1 year ago. Now that figure sounds really high, obviously, it's majority of people, 6 and 10 saying that. That's a 7 percentage point decrease from the last wave when we did this in November, which suggests that there's some easing of pessimism. And we see an increase. People think it's going to be about the same. Now, the follow on from that is that maybe people think these economic conditions are a bit baked in. People are not looking forward and going, I feel much better about the general economy, or backwards and thinking it's much worse than last year. We see people basically, I've been saying stuck in a funk, but they sort of maybe feel like actually it is sort of about the same. It's not gonna change, and it's about the same as last year. And then, as always, what we see is the personal financial circumstances. Assessments are always a wee bit less negative than the generals. People tend to think that the general's worse than their personal circumstances, and that's true of so many things in sort of social research. When we do that, proximity makes things better sometimes. But what we see here is that around 4 in 10, 4 in 10 think things have got they are worse off, than 12 months ago, and a similar proportion think they're going to be worse off in a year's time. And again, around 44% thinking it'll be about the same as last year, and 46% that it'll be the same next year. So taking all of that together, we see a picture here of less pessimism, but those increases are not transferring over from worse en masse onto better. They're going into about the same. So people think things are going to be about the same as they are now. And this chart here is a sort of chart that every time we do it, I have to point out that this whole axis is negative. So this is a net. So you take the proportion who say it's going to get better and take away the proportion who say it's going to get worse, so you get a sort of net measure, and it helps us see how it moves overall over the time series. And we can see here we've had a bump in that each time, in this last wave, it's gone up across each of the measures, as we'd suspect, because less people are saying it's worse. It's far better situation in August 2022. I think I point to this line every time, but that was like minus 90%, sentiment. People were really on the floor at that point in time in terms of their sentiment. What we see now is a little bit of an uptick. But, we've seen this before, and then it's kind of, went down. So it's too early to say that, this is the start of some kind of recovery of like or kind of move towards optimism, and it will take a few waves to see if that actually shakes out. But I think that perhaps what we can think here is we've seen lots of news recently and lots of stories around how things are better and some of the kind of overall indicators. People are not necessarily maybe feeling it. My colleague Will Scheffler wrote a brilliant blog about this a few weeks ago, actually, about kind of things are getting better, someone should tell the public, it was the title of it. And I think you can see here that some of it's feeding through a little bit, but until people start to probably feel it in their pockets and in their day-to-day lives, they probably won't start to report that it's, that they're feeling much better. And maybe it's not a surprise that people aren't saying that they feel they're going to be much better off, because lots of people are still reporting making, serious sort of adaptations to their behaviour. Now, this again has been quite stable in this wave, but we asked people, what have you done in the last 12 months as a result of concerns with money matters? And about half tell us they've reduced non-essential spending, half say they've cut back on leisure activities, similar proportions saying they've saved less than usual. 31% saying it's impacted their mental health, up 3 percentage points on last time, and about 1 in 5 saying they felt less effective at work, up 3 percentage points on the last wave. So there's impacts of this also for the workforce as well, in terms of how people feel as a result of their concerns and anxieties around money matters. And these aren't kind of felt evenly. These things, they are different, for different different segments of people. So if we take SIMD as an indicator of kind of where people live in deprivation, we can see that those in SIMD1 are more likely to say that they've bought less fresh produce than those in SIMD5 as a result. We can see that they're more likely to say they've skipped meals or cut portion sizes than those in SIMD5. If we take age, it's had a bigger impact on those aged 16 to 34 in terms of their mental health and their ability to feel effective at work, and also far more likely to say that they've borrowed from family and friends than those in the sort of oldest age category, which is perhaps not surprising. And then if we look at households with children versus households without, we see a greater impact on relationships at home and a greater impact on cutting back on leisure activities, which is both an economic thing, but obviously has a social impact on children in those households in terms of they're not partaking perhaps in leisure activities that they would otherwise. And we don't really know what the potential long-term impacts of those kind of things can be. And then in this wave, we were asking people about their buying intentions for the next year. So do they expect to spend more or less money in the next 12 months over a series of indicators? And what we can see here is that 7 in 10 expect to spend more on their household utility bills. Around half say they expect to spend more on food and drink, and a similar proportion on their housing costs. So of these kind of unavoidable costs, things that people are going to have to pay, we can see that people expect those to increase more than they expect things maybe that on their leisure to increase. So if we see here 1 in 5 expect to spend more on leisure and culture, 3 in 10 say they expect to spend less. Holidays in the UK, 1 in 5 say they expect to spend more, about a quarter that they expect to spend less. Eating out, so if, for kind of hospitality, and we've broke this down in the last few years between restaurants and takeaway in order to maybe say if there's kind of different patterns in behaviour, but what we see here is around 1 in 5 saying they expect to spend more, but more proportions saying they expect to spend less, which kind of flows through from people saying they're reducing what they see as non-essential spending, because we can see here people anticipate to spend more on what is their essential spending ultimately. And we ask people, okay, who do you think the economy sort of works for? Do you think it works in the interests of most people? It's fair to say people don't feel that. Only 7% agree with that sentiment. Around 3/4 disagree with that sentiment. So people are not feeling the economy works in the interests of most people. 8% that it works in their own interests. And around 6 in 10 then saying that they disagree with that. Primarily business. 45% think the economy works primarily in the interests of business, although that's down significantly from when we asked this in October 21. Around 6 in 10 I would have said that then, but actually there's a sense that it's maybe not really working for most people, interest or business. So kind of go figure why maybe people feel kind of not too happy overall about the economy. And then primarily wealthy people, there's a real sense 7 in 10 think the economy works primarily in the interests of wealthy people. And as I was saying, we can kind of track this by taking those who agree and disagree away from each other to get some kind of trend. We see stability on all these measures over the last few waves, but as I mentioned, there was a sense a few years ago that the economy worked actually better for business than it does now in people's perception, which is an interesting thing, and I think a lot of people kind of work in sort of industry and business stuff might not be surprised to see that that's how people feel. And then similarly, we asked a few questions at the end about, what do you think the kind of purpose of the economy is? And again, we see here that 84% agree that, you know, improving living standards and well-being should be the main focus of the economy. That's somewhat detached from how they think the economy currently works. If we think back to the last question, and similarly around, you know, 69% saying that economic growth shouldn't harm the environment or make climate change worse. And we also asked people whether it would, you know, kind of economic growth that works for most people in Scotland, would that be an important factor in them deciding how they're going to vote for in the next election? And about 3/4 said yes. So that brings me to the end of my remarks and sort of headlines of the report. Look forward to the discussion and questions. Thank you.
Very good. Colleagues, good morning. I'm Charandeep Singh from the Scottish Chambers of Commerce. Myself and Margaret are going to share some insights with you, and then I think we're going to open up to Q&A. Firstly, thank you to Scott for the presentation, but also to the David Hume Institute for organising this session, and also for your long-term survey work in this area. My team certainly use this data to inform some of our work. So while we track business sentiment and trying to understand what's happening in the economy, it is always very helpful to understand what people are saying, because people work in the economy, they work in our membership, they work in our businesses, and they're also making some big decisions that will take the economy forward depending on their level of decision making. I think some of the stats I would probably say I'm not surprised with, particularly areas like cost of living. So if we say that the cost of living crisis, as Scott has outlined, is one of the top concerns for society as a whole, if I translate that to what Chambers are seeing and what we're seeing on the ground across our membership population, we have a cost of doing business crisis, which is not too dissimilar to the experiences that we have in cost of living. So if people's taxes are going up, business taxes are going up. If we're cutting down on having meals out with our friends and family, businesses are also cutting things down as well. So overall, you know, when we've got both pockets of society not feeling good, this is really not a good position for us to be in. So we have been concerned for quite some time around business confidence and business sentiment, both today and yesterday, but the forward outlook is not looking that great either. So Q4 2025, and we have a similar survey that we run. It's called the Quarterly Economic Indicator. We run it every quarter. It's Scotland's most real-time provision of economic data across the widest geographical set in Scotland. So it really gives us a real-time insight to what's happening. And Q4 2025 ended with the lowest confidence across the members that we surveyed in the Scottish Chambers network. But broadly, those findings are in line with what's happening in the economy. Now, I wish I was able to sit here today. I'm sure colleagues that are about to speak as well were able to say things are really on the up and the forward forecast is looking really strong. Unfortunately, it's not. So if I dig deeper into some of the areas that we really look deeply at, and confidence is really interesting because it's how we feel. You know, we track how did we feel last quarter, and then we also track how do you think you'll feel next quarter. So, you know, it's kind of like feelings based. But if we look at the other areas which are more fundamental to business decisions, particularly investment, recruitment, workforce, training, you know, your forward order book, all of those indicators are currently in decline. And the forward outlook shows that more businesses are expecting it to decline than businesses expecting it to increase. So there are some fundamental challenges that are being faced in the business community in Scotland, but this is mirrored across the UK and in most parts of the world as well. But let me share a couple of things that are quite interesting. Whether they're positive or not, I'll leave it up to the discussion. But some of the interesting things are around, you know, where businesses are struggling in Scotland, where are they looking at next? So whilst we can kind of batten down the hatches and ride this storm and being cut costs, and you know we've got members that have, for example, reduced their opening hours to bring down some of the energy costs. We have businesses operating seasonally, and for some that's turned out to work quite well, but others want to go back to operating fully. We've got members that have looked south of the border to see where we can find new customers in the rest of the UK. And we're also looking at a lot of new international alliances and partnerships too. So there's some positive I would say, developments happening in that space where businesses that are perhaps relying on the domestic market are now thinking actually we need to diversify and diversify quickly. So things like the trade deal with the EU, or trade agreements with the EU and other countries like India as well, we really need to make sure that we're ready as a business community to leverage those opportunities. Now, are those enough to offset what's happening domestically? Time will tell, but it's an avenue that does need to be explored to try and get new business and economic opportunities. Workforce is a big concern, and this has been a consistent concern for some time in the chambers, in the world of chambers, but also in the business community. And interestingly, every year when we talk about workforce, there's a different challenge within the workforce theme that comes out. So if we're to look at, kind of 7, 8 years ago, there was a big issue around young people who weren't in training or employment, and new schemes were launched in Scotland and UK as well around getting young people into the world of work. And now we've kind of switched to the kind of upskilling and reskilling space to the existing workforce that has lots of experience and we need to retain their talent. And now we're kind of going back into, we're now worried again about graduates not being able to find jobs. So these challenges remain. They are a big worry for companies that are looking to recruit new talent and fill the pipeline of people that are leaving the workplace or are retiring. But in amongst all of that, there's a deeper challenge around the expectations of the workforce and what the business community is dealing with. So expectations of work that have really been fast-tracked since COVID. So how people work, where people work, expectations of salary, and how we are responding to the workforce's wider challenges that are nothing to do with the business, but impacts on their daily work. So I was really interested to see that the survey actually covered this, that people with the challenges that we're being faced with feel that they're not as productive at work. Now, the business community was talking about this about 2 years ago. I remember being at a round table and a manufacturing firm was speaking to their employees around, can you afford your energy bills? What's going on with your interest rates with your mortgage? Are you worried? We can't solve all the issues, but having the conversation does help. Being able to provide some support does help, and signposting to the right organisations. Now, were businesses doing this 10 years ago? I don't really think so. Were we all worried about interest rates for our mortgage going up and inflation going up at the same time and energy bills going up at the same time and dealing with international conflicts at the same time? And amongst all that, we're kind of going to work and doing like our personal development and trying to get like new customers. No, we weren't. But what I would say is, we do have a very strong business ecosystem in Scotland. There's a lot of strong collaboration in Scotland, and I think that has helped the resilience of us to see through some of these challenges. And my final comment, and I'll pass to Margaret shortly, is one of the tools that I think we have leveraged in Scotland really well. There's more to do though, is around how quickly we've responded to some of these challenges and how business and government and our agencies are working together. I think that is a positive. Do we always get the results that we are asking for? Not always, but having that access really quickly to the agencies and government from a business perspective has really been quite a valuable tool for us to be able to deploy. But there are big challenges, but there are also big opportunities, and we are, I think in the survey, pessimism is easing, which is really not a great economic strategy tagline for Scotland. So in conclusion, what I will say is, let's look at the data and see what the solutions are. But there are some really exciting things happening. Foreign direct investment in Scotland is doing really well with the last data set from 2024. We've got a record number of people coming to visit Scotland. We've got new air routes launching in Glasgow and Edinburgh Airport. We've got a new data centre opening up in Lanarkshire. So there's some really exciting pockets of activity happening. There's really great things happening in the Highlands around the Free Ports agenda and renewable energy. So I think we've got to balance up the story of where things are difficult, but where we do have some positive economic activity happening across Scotland. Thank you. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you for the survey. I think it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it, to see people's perceptions of the economy and general life in Scotland. I'm Margaret Douglas. I'm a public health consultant in Public Health Scotland. And my job really is to work on what we call the building blocks of health. So we recognise that what makes the biggest difference for people's health in Scotland and elsewhere is actually not really health services or even health-related behaviours. It's everything else. It's housing, it's transport, it's education, and the economy is absolutely central to all of that. So the most sort of fundamental building block is having a decent income in order to enable you to lead a good life. And so when I look at these figures, my question is, well, what does all of that mean for health? And I think it means very much for health. When we look at the health data, there was healthy life expectancy figures released just last week. And what we've seen is that healthy life expectancy has actually been going down fairly steadily since about 2013 when these figures started being calculated. So that is really very worrying from a health point of view. Similarly, when we look at mortality, at the death figures in Scotland, we found that over many decades, the mortality rate had been improving up until about 2012, when it leveled off. So we found what we call stalled mortality, which means that it stopped improving. And in fact, in the most disadvantaged groups of people, mortality actually started going up around that time. We then had the big shock of the pandemic, which obviously have affected the mortality rates even more. And we've seen a slight increase in the last year, but only just up to about the level of just before the pandemic. When we would expect in an advanced country like Scotland, we should be seeing mortality. It's the kind of final indicator really of success as a society, I think. I'm slightly biased as a public health person, but I do think it's really important for all of us. And so I think all of those are really a real concern, I think, for all of us. And looking at these figures, I think it's clear that people are very concerned about the NHS, and that is partly because we have a population that is relatively sick. We have got a relatively unwell population compared to many other high-income countries, so that we need the NHS to be there to treat people when they're unwell, but we also need to put in place the things that we need to keep people healthy in the first place, so they don't need so much of the NHS services. And so I think the cost of living, I was really interested in people's concern about the cost of living, and I think it is a real concern to all of us. We did a health impact assessment a few years ago of the impact of the cost of living crisis on health, and there's no doubt we would expect it to have a very significant effect on health through lots of different pathways. And we can see some of that in what we've seen in the survey. So I was really alarmed to see that more than a quarter of people say concerns about money is affecting their mental health, and that's people's individually reporting. So it's not just a perception, it's how it's affecting them individually. And similarly, 19% of people say they're skipping meals. I mean, the impact on health is really obvious. So I think there's lots to be concerned about in that survey. And it sounds like I'm getting into a bit of a doom spiral here, and that is always the risk when you start looking at these figures. But I think we also have to look at where the opportunities for hope. And I found the figure that showed that such a high proportion of people, more than 80% of people, think the economy should be there to benefit the well-being of the population. Actually, I think that's something for hope. We should be re-looking at our economy. What is it doing for us? Is it helping the most disadvantaged people? Is it helping all of us to have better well-being? So I think the fact that people support that so strongly actually is a really important message that I'm certainly taking out from these data. And I think there are other opportunities for hope. So within Scotland, I think we've definitely recognised the importance of the building blocks of health. We have a population health framework, which has a framework for actions over the next 10 years in order to turn around Scotland's sort of rather dismal health record up to now. And that very much recognises the importance of economic and social and physical environment factors, as well as the NHS and health-related behaviours. And then similarly in Public Health Scotland, where I work, we have a new strategy just launched very recently that's called Together We Can. And the reason it's called that is that we recognise very much that we definitely can't do this by ourselves. We're not going to improve Scotland's health just within PHS or even just within the NHS, we need to work collaboratively in order to do that. And that needs input from really the whole of Scottish society, turning around those building blocks, really prioritising the groups of people with poorest health and making sure that we have positive building blocks in place for everyone. So I do believe that we can do that, but it does take a bit of a change in mindset to start believing that we can make a difference and that we can work collaboratively and positively together to do that. So I'll leave it there, but really interested in the questions.
Fantastic, thank you. I feel like you two have given me hope. Well, Jeremy said, when we're in the, I can't see you, Jeremy, wherever you are. When we were, it's not okay to just be a little bit less worse or something. I may be paraphrasing, but the data it hasn't turned a corner yet, but both of you gave us reasons for hope there, and I'll cling on to those. So open to questions. Who would like to go first? Oh, Jeremy, the man himself.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeremy Grant. I write a weekly business column in The Scotsman. The thing that strikes me about this, and something that Charandeep mentioned a second ago in relation to how we have very strong foreign investment in Scotland, FDI so-called, is that there is a disconnect. There are three disconnects here, actually. One is how people feel about the economy, how business feels about the economy, and how foreign investors feel about the Scottish economy. All three are different. And I think that's really striking and worth recognizing. And I'd love to know what the panel, perhaps this is one for Charandeep, thinks is the explanation for this, because it's very striking. I mean, just to give you a sense of what I mean by foreign investment being strong, Japan is a really good example. Japan is a massive investor in Scotland. We're talking billions here. Mitsui, one of their biggest companies, just bought the port of Nig in its entirety. That's just one example. They see something that's going on here, which is also a UK story, actually, in terms of geoeconomics and geopolitics. But there is this disconnect, and I'd love to have this unpacked.
Shall I go for it? Okay. Jeremy, thank you for your question. And look, it is a big topic, and I would definitely align myself with your thought process there in terms of the disconnect between what's happening domestically and how how the domestic population feel, how the business community feels, and then what the international community feels about Scotland. And by the way, you are absolutely right. There are three different viewpoints across these three groups and three stakeholders. So where I think there is partly an explanation, I think if you were to go to perhaps some of the countries that are investing in Scotland, I think their populations will have similar views to our population. So if you were to go to the USA, folks are worried about the cost of gas, and I think the recent BBC World Service podcast I listened to, it was particularly on eggs. So people are worried about day-to-day things because that's their day-to-day country and it's their day-to-day city and place that they're living in. So they will naturally, and we will always all be naturally worried about the areas that we're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. Are foreign direct investors interacting in that same way? Probably not. But where I think there is a difference is in the prioritisation of different factors. So, in a local community, we are going to prioritise, perhaps a bus link to the city centre, or the opening hours of the leisure centre, or the fact that our council taxes may be going up in the locale that you live in. The foreign direct investors are probably more thinking around, is there a university in that space? Is there a good talent pool in that space? What is if I look at, if I reach to Margaret's point earlier, is there a 10-year health plan to make sure that population is going to be healthy in the long term? So I do think there's an element of horizon scanning that foreign direct investors, certainly that I'm hearing, are focused on, and more of a prioritisation of those factors. Now, that doesn't mean local populations aren't worried about all these things too, but I think when we're filling out these surveys, we are thinking about today and tomorrow rather than 10 years' time. And I think there's an opportunity here for us to understand this in a deeper way and actually bring it into the narrative of how exciting Scotland's economy is, and how exciting Scotland's economy will be, notwithstanding that there are day-to-day challenges, and I think we do need to separate that. So, for example, business rates for the business community is a challenge today and tomorrow. And our members are very much worried about their tax bill, just like households are worried about their council tax bill. But the same businesses are also thinking about 5 years down the line, where are their next set of customers going to be? So I do think that there's maybe a bit of a refocus that needs to be done in terms of the exciting part and the resilience part of what we're trying to get to. But that doesn't mean that the day-to-day challenges are not just as important. And we can perhaps learn from some of the international partners that we are working with in terms of what is making them excited. And it is things like, stable environment, the fact that Scotland is an exciting place to be. We're a highly educated workforce, but we can't be complacent. So these lines that I've just given you, these are the lines that we all give, and you've all heard them, but we can't be complacent. And actually, some of the points that we've heard from the survey show that we should definitely not be complacent when it comes to a talented workforce and a healthy workforce and a productive workforce.
I just wanted to add that, I think it's really interesting, these different perspectives of the different stakeholders. And I feel that we shouldn't be relying so much on inward investment. We should be growing our own businesses. We've just brought in the Community Wealth Building Bill, which will become an act. That is very much about recycling wealth in local communities, about supporting local businesses and lots of different models of businesses, different business models. And I find that very exciting that
Yes,
we're putting energy into that in Scotland, and I think there are lots. And that we also did a health impact assessment of community wealth building, and again we found it should have very positive effects on health if it is implemented well and at scale within Scotland. So I think to me that is one of the opportunities for us, that we're bringing in this approach to economic development that is focused on supporting local communities and local people in local communities. And I think inward investment, we certainly need some of that, but actually we really want to focus on how can we grow our own businesses and different models of businesses in Scotland.
So I'm Sammy Moira. I'm a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh and also a trustee. So I'm Samuel. I'm a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh and a trustee with the David Hume Institute. As an immigrant, I noted with some concern that immigration has climbed from dead last in 2021 to top 3 now. And when you think about immigration in Scotland, we don't really get that many numbers. And the numbers we get are students that are good for the economy. More than half of businesses in Scotland lament about skills gaps. And I just wondered what the panel thought is the thing that's sort of driving this concern in Scotland.
I mean, I'd like to start. I think we've kind of seen it as increased over the kind of 2-year period, right? We've seen it kind of gradually increase into that position now where it's the third highest ranked issue in Scotland. That never used to be the case in Scotland. It used to be higher ranked in England and Wales as opposed to Scotland, but now Scotland's basically comparative to some degree. We've also seen kind of like within that in other surveys that we've done, like a hardening towards attitudes towards immigration more generally. I think it's one of those things that's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? So some people might say, well, is it driven by the fact that the politics is focused on it, and there's been a lot of discussion around issues to do with like small boats, etc., that have become really kind of centerpieces of political discourse over the last 2 years, and there's kind of no getting away from it. It has been a big part of the discourse, so people are kind of consuming that and having a wider conversation then around immigration, so it's increasing in terms of their issue salience. I've kind of been asked here before, like, do you think it's maybe gone up because people are kind of recognising the things that you say, that business say about skills gaps, etc. That's not what it is, because what we can see from all the other data we see is that kind of hardening of the attitudes, and the question is that then driven by kind of, is that what people feel, and then therefore the politics is led by it, or is it because it's been such a kind of centrepiece in our politics? What I will say is I think it's interesting that we've seen that increase kind of wave after wave after wave over the last 18 months. Now, it's maybe just my perception, but I would say in the kind of political discourse over the last 3 months has been a little bit less on immigration than maybe there has been at an overall level. There has been more focus on, like maybe cost of living and things, and we've seen that stall. Now, I can't say that that's going to continue, but I think that that's of interest and worth noting this time round, because it was going up every wave before in terms of a concern.
We had a discussion previously about what this particular statistic means. And one can be concerned about immigration in a positive way, that we have insufficient immigration. So in answering the question, there is no indication of what the concern is, whether it's negative or positive. So it could be slightly different depending on how you interpret that particular question.
So I shouldn't worry too much. But I think on that, it can be different for different people, but I don't think we would be wrong to think that the driver was on that aspect. So for some people that might be it, but I think that we have to kind of see that it is to do with sort of people wanting reduced immigration as the kind of key driver of it at an overall level, I would say.
I'll take two questions together, which is really
Right. First, I'd just like to second Jeremy's point about the danger of disconnect. In a way, you're looking at the victims of decisions by big investors, particularly foreign direct investors, and we need a balance, if you like. And I would say that although Scotland's got many assets from a point of view globally, we are way behind, say, Southern Ireland. I mean, that Southern Ireland's productivity per head is 50% above England because it's so attractive. Now, you could argue the figures are slightly distorted, but that's massively powerful for that economy. The second question really was a little bit more public health. I don't know if it's possible to look at the situation of the over 50s a little bit more. I mean, my feeling is that so much is going to depend for these people on a good extra 30 years of really healthy life. And most diseases are 5 years in the making. So if only we could get to those people with a midlife MOT, well, it's a bit more than midlife at 55, 60. But if we don't, we'll end up paying 70,000 a year in care homes. And so I'd love to see something akin to what happened when we gave up smoking and Scotland led the world. Have a vision, and maybe we could check out whether it would be useful with your statistics. Have a vision for if Scotland could start doing something for those people so they're better prepared for those top 5 diseases, and also they might need a slightly broader life afterwards. I don't know if we know much about those people.
Thanks. And you take the two together because we're short on time.
Hi there. I was just going to ask. So I was 10 in 2008, and basically since I can remember, I've been in a sort of stew of sort of economic pessimism and negativity, and I'm 27. So I think of those that are 18, who are maybe entering the workforce for the first time, will have been 0 in 2008. Will have just been born. So I was going to ask you sort of when was there last a sustained period of economic optimism or positivity, and what message would you have for young people entering the workforce for the first time to kind of give them that motivation starting off in their career?
Fantastic. Two meaty questions. Who wants to start?
Shall I take the public health one first? So, I mean, I completely agree. If we have worsening health and the people who are now in their 50s, in 20 years' time, we're going to have a significant issue with care for all of those people, which we already have. We already have a significant problem providing social care for all the people that need it. And we have an aging population, so there's going to be fewer young people in the workforce able to care for those people. So it's even more important that we have a healthy population. I think starting at 50s is a useful thing to do, but actually we really need all ages. And there used to be a public health professor called Phil Hanlon who said it all matters, and it really does all matter. And it's really very frustrating when you're trying to think what is the one thing that we could do that would make a difference. And there isn't just one thing. You really need to work on all of those building blocks that I talked about. You need good environments for everyone. I think it starts with putting well-being first, and it comes back to that figure that 85% of people think that the economy should be about the well-being of the people, and it definitely should. And so thinking about all of our public policies in terms of what are they doing for the health and well-being of our population and for health inequalities within that population, that is where I would start. It sounds a little bit more abstract, perhaps, than what you were thinking of, but really we need all of those environments to be good, to enable everybody to be healthy. I think it also speaks to the immigration question. You know, we are going to need people coming into our population, into our workforce, to provide care and to provide all of the other roles that we have. And I think we need to start changing the narrative a little to explain why we need to welcome immigrants into our society, because we will need them even more as our population ages.
Thank you. I could certainly try my best, and I certainly agree with everything that Margaret has just outlined there from the health perspective and the workforce. And it is really interesting because, you know, we talk about things like flexible working, and people assume flexible working is all for like younger people and graduates. Actually, my experience from engagement with chambers and our members is actually flexible working is important for all types of all demographics in the workforce. And quite often it's to do normal day-to-day things. You know, can I start a bit late because I've managed to get a GP appointment this morning, and that speaks to the kind of health angle too. And it's and also looking at areas like women in the workforce and women returners in the workforce. Businesses are adapting a lot to try and make sure that the workforce and workplace is as inclusive as possible. But there's still a lot more to do, definitely a lot more to do. And that also speaks to issues like apprenticeships. You were talking about the wave of economic pessimism that you've lived through as a young person. And you can see that there's changes in the system to try and respond to some of these challenges. For example, there's increased investment in apprenticeships. There's more options for young people to choose from that perhaps me and maybe others in the room didn't have when we were going through the system. And that's also to respond to challenges in the economy. It's responding to issues that people perhaps aren't ready to work on day one after they've had 3 or 4 years of academic or educational experience. So there's new additions happening. But I would say, obviously, like most things in life, the problem occurs and the solution comes later. So there's always a lag. How quickly we can close that gap is really up to us as people with influence, but also policymakers in parliaments. And I think on the point earlier around inclusion and immigration, you know, the business community relies, as I said earlier, on a wide, inclusive workforce, and you know, Margaret outlined that very eloquently. And if I can add an additional contribution to that from a chamber's perspective, what we need most of all, and will always ask for permanently, is a clear stability in the policy direction. And what we're seeing in the immigration discussion across the UK is the immigration policies are changing. They're changing quickly, and they're making it much more restrictive, which makes us potentially less appealing for people to live, work, study here and call Scotland and UK their home. And that does impact our reputation, both here at home but also abroad. So I think if there was a message around that space, it's around we need a clear policy and let's stick to that policy. And beyond that, you know, the immigration debate is not, from a business community perspective, it can't just be about filling skills gaps. You know, we need to make sure that we're investing in our talent here, and that will take time. We need to make sure that people understand what roles and jobs are going to be available for the future, but also make sure that we're retaining that knowledge transfer, that international peer-to-peer collaboration, which is absolutely crucial to everything that we do, particularly here in Scotland. If you look at our key sectors, life sciences and research, a lot of these sectors rely on international collaboration. So you know, we see immigration as a very positive contributor to Scotland, and we'll continue to champion that message to anybody that will listen to us, Samuel. So certainly from Scottish Chamber's perspective, we're an international country. We are global at heart, and we want to make sure that that message is heard loud and clear by. And we have an election coming up, so it's a good time to get some of that message across. But obviously it's a reserved issue, so we'll try and make sure that UK government are hearing the changes that we want to see in immigration policy as well. In terms of hope, you know, look, there is something fundamentally that's happened in the last 20 years across the world, and there's no going back, right? So I think once we can understand that someone said earlier, I think Scott, you'd said about some of these issues are now baked in, and they are baked in. So, you know, when we're talking to our members and businesses, they're not waiting to like kind of go back to a particular year where they thought everything was amazing and it was just wonderful, because it probably wasn't. When you dig deeper, it probably wasn't. So really, we need to adapt to. I'm seeing some heads agreeing, so that's helpful. So really, so what is that message? I think for us, it's around, are we adapting to the disruption? Are we leading the disruption, or are we fighting the disruption? And therefore, the business community has a role to respond to the disruption, make sure that folks like you and others have a pathway into the economy, because ultimately, if you're not part of the economy and running our businesses and part of that, then we're not doing our job properly, and then that will obviously lead to wider, poorer outcomes in other areas like well-being, which has been talked about as well. So I think, embrace the disruption. We all have to adapt. We really have to be agile. Like this is the era of agility, and that should give you hope. Okay, because there's the routes into jobs are changing a lot, and we were talking about this earlier with a few colleagues around the graduate jobs market is so challenging at the moment, and business has a role to respond to that and try and understand how we communicate what is available for you and others in the marketplace. So we have a responsibility to do that. But what I would say is, you're in a great country, a great economy. Scotland has disrupted the economy in the past. We are currently part of the disruption, and we're leading some parts of it. We're probably falling behind in some parts of it, but this is an opportunity, and I would embrace it.
Fantastic. That's a whistle-stop tour. Scott, do you want the last word?
I was just going to say, I think we hear a lot about these kind of disconnects here. So we talk about the kind of debate around immigration, like there's a disconnect. People in the public maybe don't understand those contributions and those things that, and what like the Chamber saying, it's not cutting through to the public. That's not part of the debate for the public. Similarly, we talk about foreign direct investment and the potential benefits from that. When we are talking to the public about these things, they're not mentioning them. They want to know how it's going to impact on them. So I think that if there's good stories to tell, they kind of need to be told. Otherwise, people aren't responding to them.
Thanks, Scott. So we're tight on time, so I will close us there. I'm sorry. Do take it up with the panelists afterwards. Just to say thank you to you all for coming. Thank you to the Royal Bank of Scotland for the lovely breakfast and for hosting us here. We are a charity, the David Hume Institute. We can only do what we do through donations and support of individuals and organisations. So we really appreciate any help you are able to give. The quarterly survey will be again after the election. The data will be collected the week of the election. So look out for what's coming in May. We are also back again next week in this building with another discussion, working with Smart Data Foundry. We'll also have Sebastian Burnside and Gary Gillespie talking more about the economic data and what the numbers are saying. So today we've heard what people are thinking, and next week we'll be getting into more of the numbers. So please do join us for that. And it is the day after the spring statement. So there will be, I should think, more reflection. So we've got a slightly longer breakfast event for that. If you will now join with me thanking the panel for their insights and Scott for his presentation.
Good. Thank you.